Hello, and welcome to our video. Today we're going to be diving into one of history's greatest enigmas, the Ark of the Covenant. What exactly is the Ark? Hebrew tradition tells us it was crafted as God's dwelling place among humans, symbolizing his presence on earth. But I believe the Ark is something more. It's the pinnacle of Egyptian alchemy, crafted none other than by Moses himself, a master magician and alchemist unparalleled in history. In our previous video, Moses the Magician, we delved into the rich tapestry of Egyptian magic to understand Moses' transformation into a formidable sorcerer and alchemist. Today we're focusing on his magnum opus, the Ark of the Covenant. We'll unravel its mysteries, showing how just as Moses' magic was rooted in Egyptian traditions, so too the Ark was born from the depths of Egyptian alchemy. But first, let's examine some of the Ark's remarkable characteristics. While the Bible mentions numerous artifacts, the Ark stands alone in its supernatural prowess. The great genius, Isaac Newton, thought that the Ark was a cryptogram of the universe, and that by understanding it, one could see the mind of God. So with that, let's first examine some of the awesome attributes attributed to the Ark in the Bible and other various Jewish texts. First of all, the Ark didn't seem to obey the normal laws of gravity. It exhibited properties akin to anti-gravity and magnetism. It had the remarkable ability to lift itself off the ground. Also, it could aid those who carried it by becoming lighter. It could stop the flow of rivers. It could collapse a city wall as well as destroy armies. It could also kill those who touched it, or even came too close without proper clothing. And sometimes it even killed those who just glanced at it from a distance. It could also cause tumors and leprosy, could increase fertility. It also seemed to have a consciousness. It would sometimes speak directly to prophets and give them instructions. And what could have given the Ark these qualities? Could something inside of the Ark been radioactive? Well, that is the theory of several leading biblical scholars who theorized that perhaps what was really inside the Ark was some type of fetish stone. In other words, a meteorite. And these fetish stones or meteorites have a long religious tradition. The most notable example is the black stone, which is embedded in Mecca. And the black stone is believed to have been given to Abraham by the angel Gabriel and is considered a relic of great reverence. So if you're Moses and you're trying to create the resting place of God on earth, what better way to show reverence for this artifact that you're creating than by putting in a fetish stone as the material for the contents of the Ark? But that's just one theory. As we'll see, there are several others. But to understand that, we really need to look at the history of Egypt again and understand how Moses could have created the Ark. If you look at, for example, the tomb of King Tut, what you'll find is several very similar boxes to the Ark that were also carried on poles, that were also inlaid with gold, that also seemed to contain a god inside of them. And King Tut lived about 1,000, maybe 1,500 years before Moses. So these definitely existed in the time of Moses. You can see this was pretty common practice for the Egyptians to create these boxes in order to house gods. And some notable Egyptologists have gone on the record to say that this theory is actually fairly plausible. One Egyptologist, Kenneth Kitchen, who was the professor of Egyptology at Liverpool University, confirmed that the caskets from King Tut's tomb could indeed have been prototypes for the Ark of the Covenant. He says, at the very least, they prove that wooden boxes lined with gold were standard artifacts of the religious furniture of the period, and that Moses, therefore, would have had the technology and skills at his disposal to manufacture the Ark. The methods of construction that he would have employed and the use of such prefabricated structures for religious purposes are abundantly attested by actual remains, pictures, and texts in Egypt over a long period of time. So we've established that the precedents for an ark existed in Egypt at the time that Moses lived. Now let's look at how Moses actually made the ark. And you may remember that Moses went into exile around 40 years old after he killed an Egyptian guard. And so Moses flees into the desert and is there for about 40 years. So he's about 40 years old when he goes into exile, and then he comes back at age 80. What was he doing for those 40 years? Well, he was outside of Egypt at a place called Mount Sinai. And it's exactly this place that he returns after he parts the Red Sea and takes his people out of Egypt. He returns them to Mount Sinai. And what else is around Mount Sinai? Well, fairly close is another mountain called Mount Serebit. And on Mount Serebit, we find a fully functional industrial and metallurgical complex that the Egyptians used up until the 12th century. So Moses would have known that this place existed, and it would have been a perfect place to craft the Ark of the Covenant. In fact, the great British archaeologist Sir William Flinders Petrie unearthed several fragments of stone tablets at the site, which were inscribed with a strange pictographic alphabet that later was proved to belong to a Semitic Canaanite language related to the ancient Hebrew. So Moses very likely made the ark at the Temple of Hathor, and we don't know exactly what materials went into the Ark of the Covenant, but one thing we do know for sure is that the ark used a lot of gold. And how much gold exactly are we talking about? Well, some rabbis put the amount of gold to be around 9 inches deep. So why was so much gold used in the ark? First of all, of course, gold is one of the most sacred metals. And so if you're building a seat for God, then using gold would be a proper metal to use for such a sacred artifact. But besides that, gold has many other qualities that are very interesting, one of which is that it's very non-reactive and exceptionally dense, which would be a good thing if you have a radioactive stone that you're harboring within the ark. And there's another theory about what exactly could be in the ark, and that is the stone of the shamir, which is mentioned not in the Bible, but in certain rabbinical texts like the Talmud and the Midrash. And essentially the shamir is some type of stone. Some texts describe it as a worm, but other texts describe it as a stone that could cut through the hardest of stones. The Midrash, rabbinical commentary on the scriptures, offers various accounts of the shamir. It is said to be created during the twilight of the 6th day of creation. And according to rabbinical tradition, the shamir was given to King Solomon by the angel Sacher, also known as Asmodeus in some texts, who knew of its location. Solomon needed the shamir for the construction of the temple to fulfill the commandment that no iron tool should be used in its construction. The shamir was used to engrave the stones, allowing them to be prepared without violating this prohibition. So here we have a tool that supposedly can cut through stone, and perhaps the stone was not given to Solomon by some angel, but perhaps the stone was in the ark itself. And as we know that Solomon got the ark and he built the temple to house the ark, but perhaps he actually used the ark to construct the temple as well. And this also feeds into another idea. There's a book by Graham Hancock called The Sign of the Seal, where he tries to trace the history of the ark, and he actually finds the actual ark in Ethiopia. And this is a story that we'll go into in another video in more detail. But Graham Hancock essentially finds the keepers of the ark, and he has a conversation with them. And they tell him that these huge megalithic stelae that were, in some cases, over 100 feet tall, were raised by the ark itself. These things are huge. How would the Ethiopians, with their very primitive tool set, been able to have created these things? Scientists still don't know how they would have created these giant megalithic structures. And the keepers of the ark are suggesting that these structures were actually made by the ark itself. So it's possible that the ark also had some type of laser cutting tool that could cut out stone and create the Temple of Solomon or the stelae that exists in Ethiopia. And perhaps also the ancient Egyptians had technology that was similar to this, which is how they created the pyramids that are within millimeters precision. And scientists look at this today and they don't understand how the Egyptians could have built the pyramids with such precision with the tools that they had. This almost looks like it was done with a laser, but there were no lasers back at that time. At least that's what scientists think. But if the tales of the Shamir are true, and the tales of the Ethiopian guardians of the Ark are true, that the Ark can actually carve out things in stone, then perhaps the Shamir was something that was created by Moses and put in the Ark. One other interesting parallel to consider here is the modern invention of the first laser, which was created by Theodore Maiman in 1960. And this groundbreaking work utilized the power of light to slice through substances with a precision never seen before, echoing the legendary capabilities ascribed to the Shamir. But how exactly did Maiman bring the first laser to life? Well, he began with a precious gem, a rod-shaped ruby, and coated its end with silver. Around the stone, he coiled a quartz flash tube, resembling a snake or a worm, encircling the ruby. When activated, this configuration produced an intensely focused beam of light, capable of generating brightness 1,000,000 times greater than that of the sun. So could the Shamir, which is described both as a stone and a worm, be essentially describing the configuration of some type of device that could have been a laser beam device? Now, if this Shamir did exist inside the Ark, it would have required some type of power source. And how could we explain the power source? Well, what's interesting, if you look at the early days of electricity, and in 1822, the British chemist Sir Humphrey Davy placed two carbon poles a short distance apart, connected them to an electricity supply, and produced a brilliant arc of light. And they began to create something called arc capacitors and arc lamps, which the arc capacitor was a square box. And that's actually what the word arc means, box or chest. So you had these arc capacitors that would be able to store and transmit electricity. And so how these things would work is they consisted of parallel plate layers of a conductive metal separated by a non-conductive metal, an insulator, called a dielectric medium. Each of the conductive plates, effectively the positive and negative ends, were connected to a corresponding electrode. Now, turning back to the Old Testament and the description of how the ark was made in Exodus 37, it explains, "And Bezaleel made the ark out of shittim wood, and he overlaid it with pure gold within and without." So here we have the necessary components: two plate layers of gold, an excellent electrical conductor, sandwiching a non-conductive dielectric insulator of acacia wood. And Exodus 37:7 continues, "And he made two cherubims of gold, placing one at each end of the mercy seat. These were the uppermost outer electrodes, needing only for each to be connected to its respective gold plate layer. Even at low electrical potentials, such a device would become charged over a period of time, with a discharge facility arching from the cherubim. Given a suitable abundance of atmospheric electricity, a capacitor the size of the arc could charge to many thousands of volts, and its resulting arcing power would be substantial, certainly enough to kill or cut through stone. And what kind of precious stone could have been at the heart of this device in the Ark of the Covenant? Could it have been some type of radioactive meteorite, or perhaps a ruby, as in the Maimon experiment? Or could it have been something else, perhaps gold or another precious stone? We don't really know, but there are some other theories which I think are worth looking into, especially as it relates to gold. And gold has a very interesting part in the story of Moses. For example, in the book of Exodus, Moses and the Israelites are at Mount Horeb, having journeyed beyond the Red Sea from Egypt, and Moses climbs the rock to speak with God, who instructs him that he is henceforth their God and that they should no longer use their gold to make idols and images. So at the foot of the mountain, the Israelites become impatient and believing Moses must be lost. He was up there making the ark, most likely. And he had been away for so long that thousands of them removed their gold jewelry and gave them to Moses' brother Aaron, and he melted down the rings to manufacture the golden calf, which would be the idol. And of course, Moses comes down off the mountain and he becomes very angry at the idol. And Exodus 32:20 says, "And he took the calf which they had made and burned it in the fire and ground it to powder and strewed it upon the water and made the children of Israel drink it." Now, this sounds rather strange, and it actually sounds more like a ritual than a punishment. He ground the gold down to a powder and then made them drink it. Why would he do that? And you notice that when Aaron melted down the gold, he made an idol out of it. So he made molten gold. He didn't make a powder. But when Moses melted down the gold, it turned into a powder that they could drink. So what is the difference between what Moses was doing and what Aaron did? Well, some theorize that Moses had essentially turned the gold into another compound, and that compound was essentially something that was considered medicine in ancient Egyptian. Pharaohs would sometimes drink gold and other types of compounds to keep them alive for longer. And so perhaps what Moses was actually doing here was some type of alchemy for his people to give them the strength for the journey ahead. And this type of alchemy, transforming gold into some type of gold powder, is confirmed by someone in the 17th century named Philanthes, who was a alchemist and was revered by people like Isaac Newton. He wrote a book in 1667 called Secrets Revealed, where he talks about the Philosopher's Stone. And this alchemist wanted to set the record straight because most people thought that the Philosopher's Stone was supposed to turn objects into gold. But he says that no, the stone itself was made of gold, and that the alchemical art was in perfecting this process. He says, quote, "Our stone is nothing but gold digested to the highest degree of purity and subtle fixation. Our gold, no longer vulgar, is the ultimate goal of nature." And in another book, he says, "It is called a stone by virtue of its fixed nature. It resists the action of fire as successfully as any stone. In species, it is gold, more pure than the purest. It is fixed and incombustible like a stone, but its appearance is that of a very fine powder." So again, we have an alchemist in this case saying that the Philosopher's Stone is made of gold, but it is gold in another form and it resembles that of a powder. Could that have been what Moses was strewing into the water for the Israelites to drink? Another interesting idea to consider is that the manna that Moses fed the Israelites in the desert was actually some type of alchemical substance as well. Remember, the word manna literally means, what is this? Because the Israelites saw it and they had no idea what it was. So perhaps this was something so far above their heads that they had no idea what it was. But of course they ate it anyway, and it was supposed to taste sweet, but it was very small and seed-like. Perhaps it was some type of alchemical substance that Moses had created. What's interesting is that the Septuagint, which is the Greek translation of the Old Testament, when Moses creates this gold substance to strew into the water for the Israelites to drink, the Septuagint says that Moses consumed the gold with fire, and the Oxford Dictionary defines consume as to reduce to nothing or to tiny particles. So what could these tiny particles be that are related to gold but not exactly gold? And we have a few theories as to what these could be. One thing it could have been was something called a halide perovskite, which is a type of material that can be made from gold, but it's not just a single molecule or atom. It's a material that's made up of a three-dimensional crystal structure composed of many atoms in a specific pattern. And so recently, researchers made a gold halide perovskite compound. And what was interesting is in the lab, they ended up with a powder that's very dark green, nearly black, and is surprisingly heavy because of the gold it contains. So here you have a specific compound that is made from gold and turns up to be some type of crystallized powder. And this material has a lot of interesting properties and can be potentially utilized as a conductor or superconductor. There's a lot of potential applications in solar panels and electronics and various things like that. Another thing that it could potentially be is something called a gold microcluster, which is characterized by a unique arrangement of atoms, which exhibit electronic, magnetic, and optical properties that diverge significantly from bulk gold. And they have profound applications for medical applications. For example, cancer. It's very good for targeted drug delivery systems and also arthritis treatment. And another theory on what these particles could have been is something called orbital monoatomic gold, which is purported to exist in a state that's neither solid, liquid, or gas. And orbital monoatomic gold, or ORMUS for short, is claimed to exhibit superconductive properties at room temperature and to have significant health benefits, included rejuvenation and mental clarity. While the orbital monoatomic gold is very speculative, it has not been proven. It is theoretically possible that this could have been the material involved. And it is also said to be a powder. So let's set aside the speculation about the nature of the powder for now. What's important to grasp is the remarkable similarities among these compounds, particularly their vast medical applications and their superconductive properties. Next, I'd like to delve into the aspects of this superconductivity, because if the ark was a superconductor, it would possess characteristics that align with the extraordinary abilities attributed to it in the Old Testament. As we said earlier, the ark exhibited properties akin to anti-gravity and magnetism. It had the remarkable ability to lift itself off the ground, and also aiding those who carried it by becoming lighter. And it turns out that levitation is actually a property of a superconductor. An example of this would be the magnetic levitation of the maglev train, which is something that operated in England in the 90s. And these trains float by way of strong superconductive magnetism, thereby eliminating friction between the vehicles and their tracks. So in short, a superconductor is a substance that can transport electron energy with no resistance and no dissipation of that energy. Without any physical contact, superconductors will conduct energy such as light and electricity over any distance for any length of time. And they're also the key potentially to the teleportation of physical matter. This has been theorized by the Department of Energy. And they say the technique is to prepare a pair of coupled quantum systems, explaining that one of these would be placed somewhere far away. And it is then possible to make a measurement of the local system, transmit the result of the local measurement, and reconstitute a new quantum on the other side. People can, by this means, in principle, be transported by sending enough classical information. Another interesting property of superconductors is the ability to bend light, which could potentially make them invisible. And that is not one of the ARC's purported powers, but it does just show how amazing the properties of certain superconductors can be. In conclusion, as we navigate through the labyrinth of history, mythology, and modern science, our exploration of the Ark of the Covenant uncovers a tapestry rich with speculation, wonder, and the quest for understanding. The Ark's description, imbued with properties resembling those of anti-gravity, magnetism, and even superconductivity, beckons us to consider the intersection of divine craftsmanship and ancient knowledge. The intriguing possibility that the Ark could have been a superconductor not only aligns with its described abilities in the Old Testament, but also opens a door to reimagining the boundaries between the sacred and the scientific. The theories surrounding the Ark's contents, ranging from fetish stones or meteorites to the enigmatic substances known as orbital monoatomic gold or other gold compounds, we find common threads of vast medical applications and superconductive properties. These parallels not only reinforce the Ark's potential as an alchemical crucible, but also underscore the ancient pursuit of harnessing the elements for the betterment of humanity. Whether the Ark of the Covenant was indeed a product of divine inspiration, an artifact of unparalleled alchemical achievement, or a symbol of the eternal quest for human knowledge and connection with the divine, its legacy continues to expire. It challenges us to look beyond the known, to explore the nexus of faith, science, and the possibilities that lie within the smallest particles of the most sacred of artifacts. In our journey from the alchemical workshops of Moses to the laboratories of modern scientists, the Ark of the Covenant stands as a testament to the human spirit's unyielding curiosity and our ceaseless endeavor to understand the universe and our place within it. As we ponder the mysteries of the Ark and the materials that might have composed it, we are reminded of the power of inquiry to transcend time, connecting us with our ancestors in the shared pursuit of wisdom and enlightenment. We hope you've enjoyed this video. Please like and subscribe, and have a great day.